February 1st, the United States President Donald Trump is set to implement a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. In this video, I'm going to break it down and look at the impacts it's going to have on A, economy, B, mortgage and interest rates, and C, housing market in Canada. And at the end, I'll tell you the most probable and the least probable impacts it will have on the daily livelihood of Canadians. So make sure to stick around and watch till the end of this video. Let's start with Trump's justification. So Trump mentioned that he's concerned about illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and what the administration describes as an imbalanced trade relationship. This unprecedented move is poised to impact key aspects of the Canadian economy, including mortgages, real estate, and consumer finances. Moreover, the Canadian government has several times hinted at dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs, escalating an already tense economic situation. So let's break it down and see how tariffs may affect Canadians in their daily lives. First off, let's start with 25% tariff. The 25% tariff targets several of Canada's most valuable exports, including energy, automotive industry, and agriculture and forestry. Let's start with energy. Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States, accounting for roughly 20% of American oil consumption, according to Wall Street Journal. Canadian oil sands crude is a staple for US refineries, and the 25% tariff could raise costs for these refineries, potentially impacting gasoline prices in the United States. While this might initially benefit Canada's oil competitors, it could significantly reduce Canada's export revenue. The second one was automotive parts and vehicles and cars. So the North American auto industry operates on an integrated supply chain where components often cross borders multiple times during production. A 25% tariff could severely disrupt the system, raising production costs and leading to job losses in Canada's auto manufacturing hubs such as Ontario. The third one was agricultural products such as wheat, pork, canola are the key Canadian exports basically that could face challenges. For example, Canadian wheat competes heavily with the United States producers in global markets, and higher prices due to tariffs could make Canadian products less competitive. Number 4 is forestry products. For example, lumber and paper products have historically been contentious trade issues. Tariff could increase costs for US home builders and consumers, but it would significantly cut revenue for Canadian forestry companies, impacting provinces such as British Columbia and Quebec. So let's see what happens if Canada retaliates. In response, Canada of course has signaled plans for dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs, potentially targeting United States exports such as agricultural goods, for example like orange juice, beef, corn, and manufactured goods such as, let's say, steel and plastic products, and luxury goods such as consumer items like wine and high-end electronics, for example. First of all, just so you know, Canada is the first trading partner for 17 states in the United States. So impacts of the retaliatory tariffs would be rising consumer costs. Both US and Canadian consumers would face higher prices for imported goods. For instance, orange juice prices in Canada could rise by 20 to 30%. And when we look at the job losses in targeted industries, we're going to see that sectors reliant on cross-border trade, such as manufacturing and agriculture, could face uncertainty, leading to potential layoffs from the employers. And when it gets to the currency depreciation, retaliatory tariffs could weaken the Canadian dollars furthermore, which would amplify the economic challenges Canadians face already. Now let's look at the impacts on Canadian mortgages and interest rates. Probably this is one of the biggest issues that many Canadians have. So there are two probable outcomes that feels like checkmate at the end. So if there's a inflationary pressure, there's going to be some sort of outcome. If there's deflationary pressure, there's going to be a different outcome. Let's start with inflationary pressure. So tariffs typically lead to higher prices for goods, which would eventually drive the inflation. For example, imported food costs a 25% tariff on US agricultural products would increase the grocery bills for Canadian families, especially for fruits and vegetables and meat. And when it comes to energy prices, tariffs on Canadian oil exports could indirectly impact domestic energy costs as companies adjust to basically reduced export revenue. If inflation rises significantly, the Bank of Canada may respond by increasing the interest rates to cool down the economy. This would directly impact mortgage rates. And let's start with mortgage rates first. So higher rates would increase monthly payments for variable rate mortgages. For example, a 0.5% rate hike on a $500,000 mortgage would add roughly $125 to monthly payments. And the next thing that it's going to afford is the loan affordability. So first-time homebuyers and those with lower credit score would face tighter borrowing conditions. The second outcome is the potential for lower interest rates. So on the flip side, as I mentioned, if the tariffs significantly slow down the economic growth, the Bank of Canada could lower interest rates to stimulate the spending and investment. This would have following effects. First of all, it's going to ease mortgage costs. Lower rates could reduce borrowing costs, potentially enticing more buyers into the real estate market. And another impact would be boosting refinancing. So homeowners might take advantage of lower interest rates to refinance and improve cash flow. Now let's look at the impacts on the Canadian real estate market. So after we talked about the mortgages, now it's time to talk about the Canadian real estate market. There's going to be short-term effects and long-term effects. Let's start with short-term effects. So short-term effects or short-term impacts on the Canadian real estate market would be first, buyer hesitation. So high interest rates could deter potential home buyers, slowing sales and creating a buyer's market in some regions. Another effect would be inventory buildup, and also the sellers might hold off listing properties anticipating better market condition, which could lead to fewer choices for buyers. Now let's talk about the long-term effects. Long-term effects could happen differently based on regions. For example, if we are talking about energy producing provinces such as, for example, Alberta, Alberta could see reduced demand for housing as the oil sector struggles with reduced US export. And also when we are looking at the urban centers, for example cities like Toronto and Vancouver, which rely heavily on international investment, those cities might see a decline in foreign buyer activity if economic uncertainty remains in Canadian markets. Another aspect of the impact that we are going to see is the rental market. If homeownership becomes less affordable, demand for rentals could increase, pushing up the rental prices in major urban centers such as Toronto and Vancouver. So is there any opportunities in this current condition? Yes, there might be opportunities. For example, condo market opportunities can be out there for condo buyers. For example, the cooling market might provide better opportunities for first-time buyers in the condo segment. About the luxury segment, I assume that would stay more stable because the high net worth buyers, when I'm talking about luxury, I'm not talking about like $2 million. $2 million is just an average house in Toronto. The average detached in Toronto is about $1.4 million. The average like detached. So I'm not talking about 2 million like as a luxury. I'm talking about, let's say, 8, 9, 10 million dollars. So high net worth buyers could continue purchasing properties as they are less affected by borrowing costs, because there are different maneuvers when you're a high net worth individual than going to the bank and get a mortgage loan for, let's say, for example, $10 million house. Of course, there are people who do that, but if you're a high net worth individual, there are different maneuvers that they finance their houses from their own money and etc. etc. Let's go to the next impact on Canadian consumers. First of all, it's going to increase the cost of living, we want it or not. For example, let's talk about groceries. Tariffs on US agricultural products could add 10 to 15% to grocery bills, on average grocery bill. That would impact households' budget significantly, of course, across Canada. When we look at electronics and appliances, we will see that the consumer electronics offered imported from United States could see price increases as well. That would force families to delay upgrades or purchases. When we look at the job market, we are going to see lots of uncertainty. So for example, if you look at the manufacturing sector, Ontario's auto industry could face significant job costs if United States demand declines due to higher prices for Canadian components. And if we look at the retail sector, we will see that reduced disposable income could lead to slower retail sales and would impact jobs in this sector. So the result, weaker purchasing power. Another thing that I would like to add about the weaker purchasing power of Canadians would be currency depreciation. A weaker Canadian dollar would make all imported goods more expensive, further straining household finances. And I'm talking something extra than the 25% tariff. So all in all, we broke it down and we talked about things that are going to happen in different kinds of markets and economy, mortgages, interest rates, real estate market, and daily lives of Canadians. So let's wrap it up and talk about the most probable impacts and least probable impacts. I'm gonna start with most probable impacts. The first one would be higher grocery and energy costs. These are immediate and unavoidable outcomes of tariffs on key imports. The second one is mortgage rate volatility. So interest rates are likely to fluctuate depending on inflation, how inflation works, and economic performance. Based on the data that the Bank of Canada receives, they're gonna adjust either increase or decrease. So we're gonna see a few months at least of volatility, or it might be something more long term. I assume it should be, unless we reach to an agreement with United States President and his administration. The third one would be pressure on export dependent industries such as auto and forestry, which will feel the pinch quickly before everybody else. Now let's talk about the least probable impacts. So least probable impacts would be rapidly declining home prices. While higher rates may slow price growth, a sharp drop is less likely due to continued demand in especially urban centers in Canada. The second least probable impact would be massive job losses nationwide. So job losses are likely to be industry specific and localized, and I don't see it happening nationwide. So my fellow Canadians, the key to navigating this uncertainty lies in staying informed, making prudent financial decisions, and advocating for balanced trade policies. If you enjoyed today's video, or if this brought any value to you, please make sure to subscribe to my channels and share it with your friends. Have a good day. Until next time, ciao.